Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to talk about The Death of Socrates, written by Plato. Now, this book is written through the lens of Plato, so there's going to be some pink filtering going on in this scope of view, but it's a good book nonetheless. So really has three main parts to it. The first part being pre-trial, second part is trial, and the third part is post-trial. So by the name of the title, you could already tell how the trial goes. But nonetheless, there's really interesting topics that get discussed throughout the entire time of the book. And one of them is the very beginning of the book, the pre-trial. So Socrates goes to the courtroom, he shows up and he's on the front steps and he meets a friend. And he's like, hey, what are you doing here? And the other friend's like, what are you doing here? And so Socrates starts saying that he's been summoned to court. It's his first time in court and he's old already. He's like in his 70s, possibly 80s. And he's just telling him, he's like, I'm being sued by the city, And he's like, the friend tells him like, what's the case? What's the prosecution? What's going on? And Socrates got summoned to court because they said that he was corrupting the youth. He was tainting the new generation with these evil ideas and thoughts. And Socrates is like, it's crazy. He's like, all I do is I educate them. He's like, I tell them, to think about the gods and to think about all these different things. He's like, I just try to spark curiosity inside of them. But the older generation or the prosecutor and the Athenian city is saying, no, don't make them think. You're corrupting our city by making people too self-aware. And so they want it to stop. They're like, stop educating people. We don't want that. And he's like, well, how am I really disrespecting like the city? Because they say also that he's disrespecting his older generation, that he's not giving respect where respect is due. And he said, well, that's BS, because all I'm doing is helping people. He's like, respecting the city is actually making the whole population more aware of their surroundings and of life itself. And so it's this weird contradiction of like, he's being told he's not respecting the original gods and he's corrupting the city, when he's being sued by a young lawyer who's suing an older man from before. And it's like this oxymoron, like this weird balance of, I'm accusing you of doing something, but I'm doing the exact same thing. And so Socrates says, I think the lawyer just wants to get his feet in the water and some, his name in the game. So he's trying to take on a big fish so everyone starts respecting him. And his friend who's at the staircase, he's like, well, that's just BS. He's like, that's wrong. And then Socrates is like, why are you here? And he's like, well, I'm here because I'm suing my father. And it kind of goes back into that whole not respecting the older generation. And Socrates is like, whoa. He's like, what are you suing your father for? He's like, well, he killed a man. He's like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of serious. He's like, but he killed a man because that man killed one of my father's workers. So he was kind of, retribution. He's like, well, could it be? Socrates was like, well, could it be like self-defense? Could it be he was protecting the woman's life? And the lawyer was like, well, my job is to prosecute. I'm not really trying to build defenses for him. And Socrates goes on and they start talking about this weird little whole thing about everything is like flipped, everything is reverse of what it should be. And those are the main points of part one. Part two of the book is the trial. Socrates goes and he talks like in a normal manner. And the way Socrates talks to you, the way he narrates his thought process is pretty interesting. It's typical philosophy type, thought-provoking ideas. But like the way they're shown to you is like, okay, if A equals B and B equals C and C equals D, therefore A equals D. And he draws you along these long narratives of like, he'll ask the prosecutor a question. He'll say, well, you believe in this, right? He says, yes. Well, then you believe in this also from that, first statement. He goes, yes. And you believe in this too? He's like, yes. He's like, so then therefore, and he draws the whole conclusion up and he tells them A equals D. And he tells the lawyer and the jury, and it was actually 500 plus people in the jury back then. And everyone in Athens went to go find out this great philosopher was being on trial. And he ends up talking to them like in a more conversationalist type manner. He tells them, he's like, I'm not a law type person, so I'm going to talk to you like if you're my friends. And they're like, okay, fine. He tells them about how he is corrupting the youth and how one man could have all this power, all this, change over the Athenian city. He's like, where comes their real mentors? Where comes their fathers, their neighbors, their brothers, and all these people that came before them that could be telling them, hey, what Socrates is telling you isn't right. He's like, surely my belief system isn't so strong and I'm making them do all these cult type activities that's making them just forsake everything that everybody else says and they're only listening to me. He's like, I'm not that persuasive. He's like, all I do is ask them questions. He's like, if they're not being taught properly, that's not my fault. That's the fault of all their who should be their original mentors. And he's like, I am one voice versus 500. He's like, there's no way that what this is going on, what this trial is all about, is actually true. And they probably took offense to that. The jury probably didn't like him kind of saying like, well, you guys are kind of at fault for that, because as you could tell by the name of the book, he didn't win the case. Socrates was sentenced to death by poison. He was supposed to drink. Well, he drank a vial, and it slowly kills him. It stops circulation from his feet all the way upward to his head until he's no longer alive. And so they said, yeah, he's guilty, and it wasn't by much, but he was guilty. And so part 3 of this book is the ending of the trial, right? So, the first part you talked about these oxymorons. The second part is about, how, false accusations and these claims, and one man doesn't have all that power. And the third part of the book is when he's in his jail cell waiting, and he has so many opportunities to leave. Even the guardsman tells him, hey, you can leave. The boat that's supposed to bring you and bring you the poison or take you out of the poison, whatever, there's like a festival, and no man can commit suicide during this festival. Or he's like, that festival is gonna linger, and it's gonna delay, and you're gonna have a chance to escape. He's like, you can leave, get out of here. Because the guardsman was actually a fan of Socrates. He admired his work and his thinking. So he would sit down and talk to him and ask him questions, and Socrates said, no, I am not. He's like, I have 3 children. He's like, and I am not about to show them that running away from your problems is the true form of manliness. He's like, I have to die as I lived. He's like, I have to die, noble and true to what I believed in. And everything that I believed in was about being honest and pure and respecting your elders. And he's like, and Athens is my elder. He's like, Athens sheltered me. Athens gave me the education I have. Athens gave me the will to be able to have these conversations with all these great-minded people and live the life that I live today. He's like, Athens is my father. He's like, and if I run away from my father, then that's going to show my kids that they can run away from me if the things get going tough. He's like, I have to show them that if it gets rough, I have to stay here. And Socrates even had time to flee before the trial even happened. He had a notice, he had a warning. They tell you, hey, you're going to be summoned to court, and if you lose, you're going to die. And he said, well, then let me go test my odds, right? He didn't think that he would be guilty, of course, that he showed up pretty confident. But he had all these opportunities to leave, even at the very end, but he said, no, I'm going to wait. And so at the end of the book, he drinks the vial and he says, like, I have to respect where I came from. And that's pretty much the end of the book, and it really shows him. The conclusion of the book really shows the beginning of the book, that he's really a man of his word. He's really respecting the older generations, because he absolutely loved the idea of treating Athens like it was his father and respecting it so much, and he wanted to leave a great example for his kids. And I think this book was really thought-provoking, because he started talking about, at the end when he was dying, he started talking about, I think it was Heraclitus, and he started telling him how there's phases of life and death. He's like, and I'm not really gonna be gone forever. I'm gonna leave, and then I'm gonna come back. He's like, because the idea of dead and alive is kind of like saying hot and cold or night and day. He's like, but you don't turn from one to the other, right? Like a hot pan doesn't 1 second turn cold. It waits a little bit, and there's this process of like regression in heat, and it like starts slowly cooling down. And you could say like, well, T minus 10, like, at 10 o'clock, the pot is 100 degrees. At 11 o'clock, the pot is 90 degrees. And it's like, so there's hotter and colder. And so one has to be there for the other one to be relevant. You can't just say that man is tall. Well, he's tall compared to what? Not tall compared to a tree, but he's tall compared to an ant. So that pan is hot. It's like, well, it's hot compared to what? Compared to his normal resting state. He's like, and that's the same thing with life and death. He's like, you're either more dead or more alive. He's like, because you're not just gonna die and then be born. He's like, you slowly come into existence when you're in the womb and you're alive and you're a little swimmer and you start growing inside your mother's womb. He's like, you're becoming alive, you're growing alive. He's like, and then when you die, typically of old age, or say you get shot, you don't just instantly die, right? There's this process of your body starts shutting down. He's like, and I believe that the soul has the exact same experience. It comes alive and it like waits and lingers, and it comes into our body, and when we die, we go to the fields of Elysium, and then all the souls hang out under a tree and they wait there, and then until it's their time to come back to earth. He's like, I'm not really dying. Like, he came into peace with the idea of death. He's like, I'm not really dying right now. He's like, I'm slowly gonna die, He's like, but then that means I'm slowly gonna come back. He's like, because my soul really can't die right away. It takes a couple of tries. It takes a couple of bodies and lifetimes and reincarnations for the soul to slowly start withering away. He's like, and then when it withers away, he's like, what's gonna happen? He's like, the world is full of opposites. The world is made of opposites. He's like, so once it dies, then it's gonna start coming back to life. He's like, so I don't really fear death. He's like, I believe that I'm going to come back. And I just thought that was really cool. Like the whole idea, the whole reincarnation, and not just the fact that you're dead and alive, but the fact that you transition between phases, and it's always like hot and cold or tall and short, and you grow, and then like everything's relative to one another. And I was like, this Socrates guy, he's kind of smart, you know, like he kind of knows what he's talking about. So the book ends with Socrates saying his last breath, and it was a pretty interesting book. My favorite part was the last part where he starts, you know, going over everything and what is life and what is death, and he accepts it and he drinks the poison and he dies as an honest, noble man. And because of that, we have this book. You know, if he says screw this, I'm leaving, it would have been a different kind of story, and it would have been like a murder or like a mystery, like where did he go, and like tracing his steps. But no, he made it like a book of being noble and humble, and I just think it's a great book. And if you're into philosophy, I think it's a good way to get started into it without going too heavy into like certain topics. At least I thought it was not too bad. I've read a few philosophy books before this one, so I think it kind of prepared me for these ideas, and I really would put down the books at times and go, whoa, like that's, I like what this topic is telling me right now. But it's not too long of a book. If you guys want to check it out, I'll try to link it in the description, and I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any comments or ideas or other book recommendations I should read next, considering I really like this one, any other similar type, because I'm not too savvy in the philosophy section, let me know, and I'll see if I check them out and make a video on it. Thanks guys, take care.